Good morning, everyone, and happy Mother's Day. Our New Testament reading today is from the book of Acts, chapter 10, verses 1 through 20. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. About the 9th hour of the day he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming and saying to him, "Cornelius." And when he observed him, he was afraid, and said, "What is it, Lord?" So he said to him, "Your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa, and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. He will tell you what you must do." And when the angel spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier from among those who waited on him continually. So when he had explained all these things to them, he sent them to Joppa. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near to the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray, about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and saw heaven open and an object like a great sheet bound at the 4 corners, descending to him and let down from the earth. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." A voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed you must not call common." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now, while Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house, and stood before the gate. And they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. While Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them."
We're going to be in Leviticus chapter 11 this morning, but before I go there and read to you, I want to give just a little bit of an introduction to keep our map of the landscape of Leviticus clear for a little bit. Last week, we talked about the first 6 chapters of Leviticus, the content of the first 6 chapters, and I read just a small portion of that, but if you've been reading along in Leviticus, you'll know that the writing is very rhythmic. It's almost like a song. It repeats, and that repetition makes it at times difficult to read large portions. So we're going to try to read a larger portion this week, but that's why I didn't read very much of it. Anyway, the first 6 chapters are about the different sacrifices you can give. Optional sacrifices for the remission of sin guilt, and sacrifices of thanksgiving, some of which you eat, some of which you don't, but all of which showcase a willingness on the part of God to draw us close, to summon us from the tent of meeting and to say, "I want to be with the people. Let me make a way that the people can be with me." And so that brings us to the next portion of Leviticus, which is chapter 6 to 10, and that deals entirely with priests. But we're not going to talk about chapters 6 to 10 this week because we actually already did that back in 2017. In 2017, we had a whole day when we talked about the rituals of the priesthood, and we ordained new elders and members, and showed how our ordination matches the ordination in Leviticus in some interesting ways, and the importance of setting people aside. So that's just a review. The idea there is that inside the tent, God has a certain way of doing things. God is creating a new world order. And in the 6 days of building the tent, it redoes the 6 days of creation. And then God says, to the people, I need you to select from among you a certain class of people, a small subset of people. And just in the way we took a small subset of the land and we made it a special holy place that's purified, that's dedicated to God, we're going to take a small subset of the people and we're going to make them a pure people and a holy people that are dedicated to me. And the goal of all of these processes, the goal of the tabernacle and the goal of the priesthood is the same. It's to go from the specific to the general, to start small and expand and expand and expand. In fact, God says in Exodus 19:9, he gives away his master plan, which is to say, I want a kingdom of priests. I want to make you a holy nation so that everyone in this kingdom will be a priest. And indeed, we learn in the New Testament that the goal is to have a priesthood of all believers. So what the priests do is a foretaste of what we are going to do, from the priests to Israel to everyone, to be people who can be intercessors, who can stand in the gap in between a holy God and an unholy world and exist in both at the same time. That's the idea of a priest. Now, it's Mother's Day, and I don't normally preach on Mother's Day in specific, or really any national holidays, but it's so interesting that whenever stuff is going on in our lives, it colors our understanding of the text and our reading. And that's certainly true in days like this, right? To think about a specific subset of people called to do an important and specific job that affects all of us. I think that speaks to mothers. Well, we go from there and we open up chapter 11. Now, I'm going to try to read chapter 11 like this, which is like a little awkward for me, but I think it'll be the best. It'll lift my eyes up for you, because I am going to try to read a bit of it. And I'm going to stop a couple times in the middle of it to kind of give context. But for the most part, I want you to get a feel for just how some of the most difficult prose in the book reads when you have a positive relationship with it, when it's not just drudgery that you have to get through. Here we are, chapter 11, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the people of Israel, saying, from among all the land animals, these are the creatures that you may eat." Okay, so a lot is happening in that first couple verses already. Here's the thing. Often when we read Leviticus, especially if we read it out of context, if we're not paying attention to the whole story of God and God's people, where there's this inability to enter the tent of meeting, and we're just like reading a verse of the Bible all by itself, so often we see this, "and God said," and we take that to mean this is a commandment. This is a moral instruction for all time. This is something that God said is true from the Word of God. But I want to remind you, this is Vayikra. This is the whole book of God calling from the tent. And at the beginning of the book, Moses can't get into the tent. And at the end of the book, God is speaking to Moses in the tent. And so for God to be calling, and that's why I use that word Vayikra. That's what the Jewish people call this book, the God continued to call book. And this is how God continues to call us, how God continues to lure us, how God asks us to take another step and another step closer to Him. And so that's the vision. It's not we got this clear word from God and we wrote it down exactly as God said it, but rather, when God speaks to me, I'm not able to understand God saying things that I don't have any context for, right? If God tried to give me instructions for like 29th century medicine, I wouldn't know what God was talking about. But when God speaks to me, God speaks about experiences I've had, Bible teachings I've received, passages I've read, truth and context that connect with my life, and then pulls those contexts together in ways that I haven't pulled together before. And that's how God is summoning, how God is speaking, how God is luring from the tent in this passage. And I want you to see also that he speaks to Moses and Aaron, Moses, who is Moses, the prophet, and Aaron, who is the chief priest. And he says to them, all right, from that small group, I want you to go to the whole tribe, the whole community. Speak to all the people of Israel and speak to them about what? About what they eat. Speak to them about the stuff they put in their bodies, because that's important. That matters to their spiritual health, and it matters to their ability to be priests for other nations. Just as you, Aaron, and your sons are going to be priests to the people are going to be priests to the neighbors, to other nations. And so, here's what he says about the land animals. Any animal that has divided hooves and is cleft-footed and chews the cud, such you may eat. But among those that chew the cud or have divided hooves, you shall not eat the following: the camel. For even though it chews the cud, it does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. The rock badger, for even though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hoofs. It is unclean for you. The hare, for even though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hooves. It is unclean for you. And the pig, for even though it has divided hooves and is cleft-footed, it doesn't chew the cud, and so it is unclean for you. Of their flesh you shall not eat, and of their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean for you. All right, so we're introduced to this concept of uncleanliness. And this is going to be a concept that takes place throughout the whole section of this book, up until chapter 16. We're talking about what's clean and what's unclean. And the first things that are clean are animals that fit into their group well. Or the things that are clean are animals that are the way you expect them to be. Like a cow. It eats grass, it walks around on hooves, it's a normal cow. Now everything that deviates from that norm as an animal, that's unclean. It's impure. Talking about purity is almost better than talking about cleanliness. It's not 100% what it is, but it's some percent something else. Don't eat those. Stay away from those when you're going to come into my presence. Because when you're near the tent needs to be a place that serves as a lesson in 100%itude. And so only eat 100% something animals. Watch how this continues to be the case. These you may eat of all that are in the waters. Everything in the waters that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the streams, such you may eat. But anything in the seas or the streams that does not have fins and scales, of the swarming creatures in the waters, and all the other living creatures that are in the waters, they're detestable to you, and detestable they shall remain. Of their flesh you shall not eat, and of their carcasses you shall regard as detestable. Everything in the waters that does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. So once again, if it's like a fish, if it's in the water like a fish, but it doesn't swim like a fish, that's a little weird. That's just, it's different from the norm. And I want you to pay attention to the things that are consistent with the norm, that are exactly what it says on the tin. We'll keep going. These you shall regard as detestable among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They're an abomination. Notice that word abomination. You know, sometimes people, as a way to justify hate speech against the LGBT community, use the word abomination to argue that the way homosexuality is referred to in the Bible is like an extra special super sin, that it's like more sinful than other sins. That's not true. Eating the wrong bird is an abomination. That's not what the word abomination means in the Bible or how it's used. That's just something that's being used to hurt people. The eagle, the vulture, the osprey, the buzzard, the kite of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the water hen, the desert owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, of course, there is some practical purpose to this. You know, if you're not aware of the best food safety regulations, you don't know that your lobster is sustainably caught and well cooked. Lobsters are pretty dangerous to eat. Same thing with pigs. Same thing with bats. And so to live in this way, to live the way God instructs you to live, for the people would serve as a good object lesson, because they would notice, hey, when I'm following God's instructions, I'm actually sick less often. Now, I don't think that God is ordaining these commands for that reason, as a way that this was the best God could do to keep the people clean, because if so, then he would have said, boil the water. Hey, by the way, you can make antibiotics out of mold. And God's not saying those kinds of things here. What God is saying is, I want you to be a people that are marked by purity, that are marked by cleanliness and difference. And the way you're going to be different is by not eating the things that the neighbors eat, that the nearby tribes eat, and by eating things that are fulfilling, that are consistent with their kind, that live in the way you expect them to live. I'll read about winged insects next. The winged insects that walk upon all fours are detestable to you, but among the winged insects that walk on all fours, you may eat those that have jointed legs above their feet, with which they leap on the ground. Of them you may eat the locust according to its kind, the bald locust according to its kind, the cricket according to its kind, the grasshopper according to its kind. But all other winged insects that have 4 feet are detestable to you. So you can eat the grasshoppers and the locusts, but not the other bugs. It's interesting. We often talk about stuff you can't eat. Oh, you can't eat pigs. That's the main kosher thing. But you could eat locusts. You want to eat some locusts? Anyway. Now, this is where the whole narrative for me just kind of turns on its head. Watch this. By these you shall become unclean, and whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean. What's your Bible say? Verse 24. Be unclean until evening. And whoever carries any part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Not really that big of a deal, huh? It's not like, hey, if you eat a pig, you are going to be cast out from Israel. You're not going to be able to be among us. You'll be quarantined, which in some ways, I think now that we've lived this experience together would be kind of justifiable, right? Because we know that if somebody in the community eats a bat, and there is uncleanness there's a germ that results from that can be transmitted. That uncleanliness can move around, and we're really concerned about purity and cleanliness. And so certainly, you have to put them to death or something, right? This is Leviticus. Isn't it going to be law and judgment? And no, they need to wash. They need to take a bath, and they need to wait for the bath to take effect. Again, we don't have soap in the same way here. So wash thoroughly. Wash specifically in living water, that is running water. Don't just use, stagnant mosquito water, but running water. And after they're washed, the next day, they'll be fine. See, cleanliness and uncleanliness in the Levitical sense, this part of the Bible, isn't about morality and immorality. It's not about even good and bad. It's just about pure and impure. It's about 100% and 98%. And God says, if you're in my presence, you need to be 100%. I need the things that are around the temple to be completely those things, because I'm trying to do something here. I'm looking for a body. I'm trying to build a kingdom of priests, and I don't want you to haze up that message, to cloud it and make it more confusing what is going on here. And so, if you get unclean, if you get impure, that's called living life. You need to get clean again before you come into my presence. And you can do that. And I've made ways for you to do that. Now, nowhere is this better illustrated than in the next chapter. Turn your Bibles to chapter 12. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, she shall be ceremonially unclean 7 days, as at the time of her menstruation. She shall be unclean." You know, there is nothing in the world that is more incredible, that is more beautiful. I've heard theologians and commenters say that there is no time when a human can be more like God than when they're giving birth. You know, that's the closest we get to creating life, to bringing a new life into the world. And it happens through sacrifice. It happens through work. It happens through pain and commitment. It's an incredible thing. It takes an incredible amount of strength, and it is an unmitigated good. It is good to bring new life into the world. It is how we as a human race stay alive. It's how every tribe and every nation continues to exist. Bringing new life is not immoral. Nobody would ever think it might be. But you know what it is? Messy. I mean, it just is, right? Like there is blood involved and discharges and risk, danger. It exists at the threshold, at the veil between life and death. It is an act that takes you to that place of life and death. And God is saying, listen, this tent of meeting, this tabernacle, these sacrifices, I'm trying to teach an illiterate group of people something about how to live, about what life that's truly life looks like and what death that's truly death looks like. And I'm using the death and the blood of animals to do it. And so don't bring your own blood into that situation. Don't bring your own experiences with life and death right up to me. And for that matter, after you've given birth, please, please, please take a break. Like, rest for a little while. You have already done the worshipful thing for as long as you need. Like take some time and rest. But the thing that I'm doing is something that is separate from that. And so when God makes distinctions between the clean and the unclean, between the pure and the impure, between the things that belong inside the temple and the things that don't, he's not making distinctions between things God likes and things God doesn't like, or things God has stuff to say about and things God doesn't have stuff to say about. In fact, the goal is to expand the temple via the priesthood and to bring more and more of all of our lives into this space where God can dwell, to create more and more space, more and more environments that represent the goodness and the presence of God to all of us. Do you see now why in the passage Heather read, in Acts chapter 10, God is able to say, no, you don't understand. Like, never eating anything unclean isn't the point. It's not even what I instructed, right? The point is to know what's clean and not, and to start paying attention in every aspect of your life, including what you say, including what you eat, to what goes and what doesn't. But when there is somebody who is living a Gentile lifestyle who needs my love, you bring them my love. That's the reason that we did this whole thing. You get it? It's kind of like moms. You know moms. When you're little, what do moms tell you about the stove? Don't go near the stove. The stove is dangerous, right? The stove, don't touch the stove. When it's on, when it's hot, just don't go anywhere near there. Don't touch. But then you get a little older, and it's more of, here's how to touch the stove. Okay, be very, very careful. Make sure you've got this on your hand, and we're gonna turn it up, and this is how we make spaghetti. And then it gets to a point, by the time you're an adult, you're calling up mom, right? And you're saying, hey mom, what was that recipe again? And she'll tell you, oh honey, you need to turn that stove up, right? You need it hotter. It's not that mom was wrong. It's that mom had to teach us about the stove by degrees, get us ready for what was coming next. And sometimes something that was dangerous to us at first becomes life-giving to us later on. What does mom say about the garbage when you're a toddler? No, bad, dirty. We don't touch garbage. You get a little older and it's more of, hey, will you take out the garbage? Right? Will you be a part of carrying the garbage out of our community, out of our environment, and then wash your hands afterwards? And then you get to a place where you become a mom yourself and you start changing diapers. There's this reality to what's clean and unclean, and there's a truth that we need to be able to distinguish and we need to be able to avoid. But as we grow in our ability to distinguish and make decisions, we grow in maturity, God can reveal more and more to us. It's not even an Old Testament, New Testament thing. God, over the course of the Old Testament, is unveiling new parts of God's self. There are times when, the staff and the tablets that are put in the ark start as a good thing, and then we need to get rid of them because now they're a distraction, right? Where the sacrificial system started as a way to be close, but eventually the prophets are going to say those sacrifices were never the point. So some theologians try to make it out to be like, oh, there are these specific dispensations and you study the dispensations. It's not so much that, it's just that as we grow in relationship, the things that were good to us, if you're an alcoholic, right? You start making stricter rules. You start saying, absolutely not. I will shop at the store that does not have a liquor section instead of the store that does have a liquor section, right? And then you get to a place where it's, well, I can actually go to that restaurant, but I'm just going to have a water. And then there are some things that it's just, I'm never going to go there, never going to cross that line again. So that's the vision that I want to leave you with, and I hope that it will help to continue to recuperate and rehabilitate your relationship with this wonderful text, this text that the Jewish people call Vayikra, God's summoning, text of Leviticus, to bring you the image of God as a mother who instructs her people, who teaches us day by day about the distinctions that we need to make because we are loved and because we are children who are going to grow up into full maturity in God. That's the message here.